I'm Katie Atwell, co-host of the EduGals podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Amy Buckley is the Chief Academic Officer and co-founder of StudyHelp, a tutoring platform. You can hear Amy talk about StudyHelp at stephenmiletto.com/449. That's episode 449. Amy has given me a few $100 gift cards for StudyHelp, to give away. That is so cool. Just send me an email at my contact page, stephenmiletto.com/contact. Simply say, I would like a $100 gift card to StudyHelp. First come, first serve. This is a giveaway that is awesome. Good luck. Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Lesley Koplow. That's right, she's back on the show, and with her, we're talking about her newest addition to her A Story for Children in the Time of COVID series. You've previously met Lilah and Jasmine, and now there's Wilson. Join us as we talk about Wilson's Wishes. Awesome book, awesome conversation. You're going to love this episode. Thanks for listening, and before you go, it'd be so cool if you went to my website, stephenmiletto.com/reviews, and left a review. Could you do that for me? Thanks so much. Enjoy the show. Hey, do you need help in becoming more effective at teaching virtual classes? Well, NVTA, the National Virtual Teaching Association, has a semester program that is college accredited and designed to help you become more successful as a virtual teacher. A few of the topics that will be focused on are establishing relationships in the virtual environment, virtual instruction best practices, differentiation in the virtual classroom, and managing virtual resources, among others. NVTA is an affiliate partner with Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, and there's so much there to help you be successful in the virtual classroom. So take a look. Go to my website, stephenmiletto.com/sponsors, find the NVTA logo, and click on it to take you to their website. Happy learning.
You are listening to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, a podcast for educators, helping you help kids achieve their dreams. And now here's Steve with this week's show.
Lesley Koplow is a clinical social worker, teacher, and author who lives in New York City. She is the director of emotionally responsive practice at Bank Street College, founder of Networks for Schools That Heal, and a psychotherapist in private practice. Lesley is the author of several books, including Where Ragdolls Hide Their Faces, The Way Home, Unsmiling Faces, How Preschools Can Heal, Creating Schools That Heal, Bears Everywhere, Supporting Children's Emotional Health in the Classroom, Tanya and the Tobo Man, Politics Aside, Our Children and Their Teachers in Score-Driven Times, and Emotionally Responsive Practice, A Path for Schools That Heal. Lesley is also the author of a children's series, A Story for Children in the Time of COVID, Lilah in the Land of the Littles, Jasmine's Big Idea, and now Wilson's Wishes. On episode 378 of Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, we talked about Lilah in the Land of the Littles, and episode 414, we talked about book 2 in the series, Jasmine's Big Idea. And today, we're talking about her third book in this series, Wilson's Wishes. Lesley, thanks for joining me today, and say hi to everyone.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's awesome to have you here again, and kudos on the third book in this series. This is very nice.
Thank you.
So before we dive into your latest book, Wilson's Wishes, let's talk about you as a young reader. Did you ever have a series of books or characters that you liked to read and follow their adventures?
Well, when I was really little, my dad used to read the Madeline stories to me and Dr. Seuss. So I could recite like any rhyming story on the early childhood shelf.
That's awesome.
And when I was older, I read the Boxcar Children books. And I also, when I was a little older, liked those biographies of, famous people that were like dark blue books in the school library. One was on Clara Barton. One was on,
I remember those. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, I like those.
I did too. I visited those often. That's cool. It's when you're talking about reading and talking to authors, it's cool to know what they may have started off reading, what encouraged them a long time ago, and what adventures, especially because so many of those series that, like you're mentioning, that's awesome. You get some good ones there. So nice. I said this before, but I say it again. Congrats on completing your third book, Wilson's Wishes. It's in your children's series about children in the time of COVID. Could you share why you decided to write a children's series?
I decided to do this. I basically did this during the time of COVID when everyone had to be at home all the time. So I used my energy to write these stories because I was looking for stories like that to read to the children in our school-based work and also in my private practice. And I wasn't finding them. I was finding a lot of books about washing your hands and wearing your mask. But beyond that, what it was like to be little in this time and the kind of things that come up for kids during this time. So that's why I decided to write them. That's
cool because it feels like, a child would understand what you're talking about, and which is very nice because, yeah, you're right. Lots of the other books, it's like, here's all this trouble happening and we got all this stuff and wash your hands and don't get near anybody. And not a lot of explanation that a child might, be able to understand a little bit. And you do a good job with that. Start with Lilah, excuse me. So one of the things I got to say is I read your books, I feel like you're really writing to two audiences, the kids and parents. Could you talk about why the books may not just be for kids?
Sure, but tell me what gives you that feeling.
Because as things are happening, and the child is exploring this world and trying to figure things out, it's almost like you're talking to me to say, your child's asking these questions and thinking about these things, and you should probably try and figure out how to answer them or try and, pay attention to what your child's doing. That's what I'm hearing. So as your characters, whether it's Lilah or Jasmine or Wilson, are dealing with the different stuff, that actually I feel like, yeah, this is probably stuff that kids are asking themselves. It's just that they may not say to their parent or say to their teacher or whoever that adult is, can you help me with this? And that's why I feel that way.
Okay. So I guess what I'm doing consciously is reflecting, knowing what it's like to be little and knowing what it's like to be little in this time, because I encounter so many children through my practice and also in our school-based work. So I see and hear what's on their minds. I can watch them play. I can sort of get into their mental space around what it's like for them. And so one of my big things I'm always saying to parents and teachers is no child development, because then you'll know how to make sense of what your child is reacting to and talking about and, doing. So what I'm doing in the books is reflecting through the kids' eyes what it's like for them. These little three characters who have different stories, different cultures, different family histories during this time. And their way of making sense of it is through play. And that's a message that I hope all parents are getting from these books and all teachers are getting from these books, because that's how children make sense of life. They play about what's going on. We talk about what's going on. They need to play about what's going on. And in each of these stories, the resolution internally for the child comes from their play and their relationships.
And I love that. It's so cool. And it just speaks loudly, because I think as adults, we get so caught up in what's going on around our world that we think our children are just getting it, whether it's because we're telling them stuff or because, it's, you might have the thought, how could you not understand this? This is what's going on. And instead it's really, that's not the case, because they've got to figure this out and they need some help doing it. And just like you said, the play really helps. And then having those, we're going to get into this a little bit more in a few minutes, but the relationships and the friendship circles and so forth like that, helping them. And that's why I really think it speaks loudly, because I think it reminds a parent who's reading your books that, they need some help understanding this, and you need to pay attention to what's really going on in their world, especially if you're so isolated. I mean, I just have to say this. I mean, it was cool when, as as schools start opening and stuff like this, where I am, the first thing that kids start doing after being away from each other is going to hang out with each other. And they immediately, boom. And the adults did the same thing. And I think, one of the things that a lot of adults forgot is how important that social interaction is. And so it's kind of easy. You just kind of move about your world and do it. But I think that's what your books do and your characters do, is remind us that we can't just do that. We have to, pay attention to what they're feeling, what they're thinking or might be thinking or not understanding.
There's been a huge increase in mental health needs in children. It's like a national crisis of mental health entry into emergency rooms for children and adolescents, have in large part because of isolation. Social and emotional isolation is really antithetical to emotional well-being. And in each of the books, that their isolation manifests differently and is a different conflict for each of the children. But if there's a message for adults here, it's not to leave children alone with big issues and big feelings. So
important. And that comes through loud and clear. So you did awesome there. You did awesome. So let's talk about Wilson's Wishes. I mean, what was your original inspiration? I mean, where'd that come from? And
well, I work in New York, and so I have contact with people from every culture, every imaginable place in the city. And parents were afraid and kids were overwhelmed. And so I thought, okay, let me just take one little guy. I'll just create one little guy, a 5-year-old, who of course doesn't have any idea what the big picture is, but is experiencing something he never experienced before and is very confused and upset by it.
And, one of the things that, as you're describing what's going to happen in Wilson's world, because he's going to get blamed for having possibly the virus and his family causing it and stuff like this. So give us a little background on who Wilson is.
He's just a little guy that I created, having had a lot of experience over the years with lots of little guys. So he's a little guy who rides the bus to school, and suddenly a kid who sits behind him, a big kid, starts whispering things to him that he doesn't understand. So the kid keeps saying things like, "Go back to China." And he thinks, "I've never been to China. How can I go back to China?" He has no idea what he means or what's happening. And so little by little, the kid's messages get more aggressive and he needs help to deal with it. And finally, he asks his grandma about it because the kid whispers that his family has Chinese germs. And so he tries to put 2 and 2 together. His great uncle had died from the virus the year before. And he asked his grandma if his grandpa brought Chinese germs to America. And is that why his great uncle died? And she says, "Of course not." And she gives him some perspective about when his family came here and when this virus started and how his uncle died and why his uncle died and all of that, so that he has a way of understanding what's going on. So he takes what she says and sort of mulls it over. And one of the things she says is that in America, unless you're a Native American, all families started out somewhere else. Everybody's family started out somewhere else. And he's very intrigued by that idea. So when he goes home, he goes to a special secret hiding place where he likes to play and make his wishes come true. And he plays about that idea.
Which comes across so real. And I think it's really cool. I mean, your kids sound and act like kids is what I mean. but it just, they sound and act like kids. And I think that's so cool. And, one of the things that happens in your books, which you've alluded to already, is there's a circle of friends. I mean, could you talk about the importance of friendship in your books? I mean, those relationships?
So in the first book, we focus on Lilah, who's a little girl who's got older brothers and sisters who are teenagers, and they're always on the computer doing Zoom school because it was the first year of the pandemic, and she can't, she's in kindergarten, so they figure, well, she can live without it for a little while. And her mom's busy working in the house on the phone all the time, and she feels really lonely and is wishing for her best friend who can't play with her because her best friend's grandma lives with them, and it's too dangerous for this other little girl, Jasmine, to be with other people because she could bring home COVID. So that dilemma of isolation is how the series starts out. And eventually she figures out how to have, or Jasmine's mom figures out how they can have some outdoor play dates. The story of Jasmine is about a little girl who can't go to school even when school reopened because of her grandma, because the family thinks it's too dangerous, which it was. And she feels very alone. And she figures out how to bring her friends into her heart and mind so she doesn't feel so lonely through play. And then, of course, one of the things she does is she makes them in the snow. She makes snow people. She makes them in the snow. And one of the kids she makes is Lilah, and the other one is Wilson. There's another one of her friends from school. And then we meet Wilson, the real Wilson, in Wilson's Wishes. And he, when he gets teased by this kid on the bus, runs to his classroom, and there is Lilah and Jasmine, who are so happy to see him. And then he feels like, okay, I'm good. Kids need a good mirror. You need to see themselves in a positive light. And his friends love him, so then he reconnects to his feeling of being worthy and included.
I think that's so cool because, I mean, if anybody thinks about it, because I'm going to step it forward to adults, because I think the same thing with adults. I mean, we desperately need, especially because even if we don't agree, if we do have that circle of friends, but we're all not on the same, the same wavelength with different beliefs and such, there's a reason why we're friends. And there's something that helps, help us get along together and figure things out and, root for the same team, whatever that might be, or just, want to spend time, especially when we're dealing with something difficult. And, you go back to dealing with kids. I mean, I had young circle of friends, and, one of the things that I loved in the early elementary school days, well, I still do, is watch reruns of the original Star Trek. Except now I don't do, in those days what we did was when we got recess at school, an ancient piece of equipment called the carousel or whatever it was called, we'd get on that thing, and that was the hub of the ship. That was a couple different things for us. We used that as the bridge, and we also used that as the transporter room. So when you needed to go to the planet, you spun it really fast, and then you jumped off. And
there you go.
And it's funny, those relationships of dealing and being around each other and hanging out and making that play was so important and still is. And I think that you so bring that out with your characters because they help one another. And there's nothing, it's not like you're not preaching at us. I don't know how else to say that.
No, I really feel like that really does nothing for kids. They just repeat what it is that they think that you want them to say. And then they go back to doing whatever they were doing before. Exactly. Very anti-preaching, actually, for kids.
Very much so. And that's what is so cool about it. And I want to go back to my example of playing on that playground. One of the main group, no matter what happened, we could end up coming back together. And so like myself and one of the other guys, we got into, whatever a first grade tussle looks like. And it was all over the TV show, by the way, arguing about something that happened on it. And then just as quickly as the teacher interceded and we got separated and punished, that afternoon we were back to being on the bridge in the transporter room and all that sort of stuff again. And I think that's what comes out of play in those relationships and so forth, and getting back into the world where, Wilson's dealing with some a difficult topic where, people are having some sort of fear or sending anger towards him and his heritage and such. It's a difficult thing. And then the answers come through, and the importance of those friends is right there, and family too, by the way, which is cool. So one of the things that I got to talking about is, in Wilson's wishes, there are some adults who play an important role. And I thought this was kind of cool. Could you talk about that? What happens?
Yes. So the first person that he reaches out to is his grandma. And his grandma is the person who picks him up after school every day. So she gets to hear his school stories before anyone else. And she listens and she helps him with perspective. And he's has a very trusting relationship with her. He eventually decides to ask his parents to help him with this. Take me to school. And I don't want to ride the bus because this is what happened. So they, who understand immediately what's happening, say, okay, we're going to take you to school and we're going to help you talk to the principal about what happened. So they do that. And the principal, he's a little scared because, he's little, and going to the principal, he's not sure what that's going to mean. But the principal is very supportive and really expressive about how valuable all the different kinds of kids and cultures and communities are in their school. And he should always ask for help from an adult if someone's bothering him. And he feels relieved and secure. The only reason that the teacher isn't in this story is because I couldn't fit her on the page.
Nice. I like that.
My illustration in the classroom, I really wanted both Lilah and Jasmine there for continuity in the story. And then I couldn't fit the teacher in there, which was too sad because I'm very big on teacher-child relationships.
That's funny. I just assumed I would have been good. I would have been just fine without ever knowing that, because I just assumed it's just what you're doing as the tool to get into the point of the story. So,
but also the principle is important because children have radar for authority. Whoever is in charge is what they're looking for. They want to know that, and the person who's in charge has a lot of power to help children feel safe and to buffer external things that are damaging to them. And so having someone in charge who hears Wilson's story and is able to give Wilson a good mirror, see him in a positive light, and help him make boundaries around someone who's doing something hurtful that they shouldn't be doing. And his school experience is important. So.
Having been a principal, I greatly appreciate the principal being a good guy. So too often we're portrayed as either being just dumb or the bad guy. Yes. And so I appreciated you having a good guy principal.
School leaders are the whole show. If a school leader understands children, understands development, and sees the importance of supporting emotional health in their community, in the climate of the school, then the school thrives for children. It's a place they want to be. And if the school leader doesn't see that, it's a place nobody wants to be.
That is so right. It's and kudos to those principals who have spent some time connecting with kids, because a lot of times it's easy. The role doesn't always, even though you're in charge of the building and that main leader there, so many things take you away from working with the kids. So they have to spend time connecting and doing things that that help the kids see them as somebody that they want to talk to or talk with or have fun with, and everything from. I mean, I've seen some funny ones, so and to work as hard as they can to try and make that happen. And it's a cool thing because then the kids see them as someone that they can come ask those questions of, or who might be able to provide them guidance.
Yes. And all those things that principals do all day long that come from external demands, whatever the resolution of those things are, have impact on children in about 20 seconds. So knowing children and being able to see those connections is important.
Very much so. Very much so. As a principal that was hired to make change in buildings, one of the things that happens is that you come in and there's lots of things that you start focusing on. Well, one of the things that I would do is I wanted kids to get to know me also, and so I'd play pickup games of soccer and play in the band and stuff like this. And there's nothing better than as they start to get to know that you're okay, that you're actually a real person, and and it's kind of a cool thing. So I think it's neat that you put in a person who's connected with the kids. So very nice. Thank you. I sound like I'm getting ready to say for all those principals out there.
I work with some great principals in my Bank Street project. So
that's
it wasn't
cool.
hard to invent one.
That's very cool. I like that. So, I got to say this because as I've noted in our previous talks, I have to mention your amazing use of scrap materials to create the images of the scenes and characters, because I think it's so cool, because it just feels like any second it's going to come alive. It's going to be animated. And I could see this being an animated short, as all three of your books. And, Wilson's images let me try that again. Wilson's Wishes has that imagery as well. And they're awesome. I mean, it's just the character. I mean, I think it's cool that you take scraps of material and they're the characters. You only have to get so specific in the detail and so forth, and there they are. I mean, and it's cool the way you do that. I just love that. I mean, how do you do this? I mean, how do you do that? Do you sit there and kind of, and then you've already kind of answered this a little bit when you talked about how the teacher wouldn't fit in the image.
Okay, so I illustrate using collage, because I've been doing collage during the pandemic. I've done some collage over the years, but I sort of stepped it up during the pandemic and decided to put these two things together. My wish is to create children's books along with the collage. And it works so well. And it's the way I work is a creative process, which makes sense, but collage is about putting things together and creating something new, which I love. And it seems to work for, the imagery seems to work for children. So.
Oh, very much so. And for adults too, because it's like, this is cool. I just think it's so awesome how you've created these characters, and they're not fine detailed by an artist. They have your artistry of the taking the materials and making them into the image that you wanted. And it's so awesome because they're cool.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Because I just love it, what you do there. So that is so awesome. I got to ask you this. I mean, do you think parents should read Wilson's Wishes with their children? And if so, why?
Well, mostly when I'm writing, just because of the work that I do in school communities, I'm thinking classrooms, but certainly the books are very accessible to anyone who's spending time with children, to parents, to caregivers, etc. And I guess there'd be all different reasons why you might pick up Wilson's Wishes. I have a colleague who read it to a classroom, one of our school communities, collaborating school communities. And this particular classroom was all Black and brown children. There were no Asian children, and they were all over it. They were like, This is about, when big kids are mean to little kids, and someone said something mean about my mom, and so they related to it in a very easy way. And I would also guess that at this time, there are Asian American children who would find it very powerful and relieved to know that they're not alone when someone says something bad. I kind of think it might be a better fit for kids who are a little bit older than Wilson in the Chinese American community, so that they do have a sense of it and could talk about what it's like to be little and not really understand what's going on and all that kind of stuff.
Well, as a note, I think it fits with just about anything that kids work with, even though you have that subject of the blaming them for the virus and so forth because of words that are said, but but it also deals with the fact of somebody, like you said, the kids immediately said somebody, causing somebody else problems, making fun of them or doing whatever.
The big kid is saying, yes.
Yeah. And
everyone had a story. And so that's what I love about the kind of books that don't preach. Kids will take where they need them to go. And that's what I want to happen. I want kids to find the meaning that they find in a book. And that's all different. It's always going to be like that. In a whole class of kids, about 18 kids, all of them are going to find some different part of it that resonates or not, but they'll take it where they need it to go. And I think that's a really important thing, to sort of read to kids and not ask specific questions. Say, so what do you think about that story? What does it remind you of? Just let it mean what it means to that child. And parents can listen and see what it means to their child. And teachers need to listen to all the different things that it might mean to all the different children in their classroom community, so that kids don't feel alone. They feel like adults understand, adults are with them.
So important. I think that just too often the adults are dealing with whatever their world is, and they kind of think the kids are resilient, they'll be fine, and they don't spend enough time, hearing how they're interpreting things. I mean,
yes,
it's a interesting world. So I love the way you make this happen, because it's not, like I said, and like you said, there's, you went out there and looked, and lots of the books, are just telling you how to do things as opposed to putting it in the world of the kids and their play world and such, which is cool. So, one of the things it lends me to, and I keep going back to reading and the importance of it. How can reading with a child help during stressful times, and whether it's the teacher or parent or older sibling?
So if you read to children and you read things that sort of, there's people can't see, I'm just realizing they can only hear, but if you read things that reflect what's going on for them developmentally and what's going on in real life, it heightens their attention to that material. And it then lends itself to an invitation afterwards about what that meant. What it remind you of. You want to draw a picture of something it reminded you of. You listen to what everyone's saying. And then literacy becomes your own voice. And that is an incredibly motivating factor for emergent readers. If what you're listening to and what you say gets written down and what you write and draw gets elaborated, that's your voice. It's not distracting you from what you're thinking about and what you're feeling. It's a vehicle for expression of what you're thinking about and what you're feeling. And everybody wants that.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's interesting because, like, I think, the kids can create these different worlds, and I think it's important for them to have the parent interpret things or help them with whatever. And I think that comes through in many different ways. I think about kids who go through at an early age, parents getting divorced, the death of a parent or an important family member, someone who, in my case, like a my best bud, which was my grandfather, that type of thing, or, and there's any number of other things that I think adults a lot of times think everything's going to be just fine, but they don't realize that they might need that person spending time kind of having some conversations about it actually. And,
yes. And in this time, there's so many children who have lost important primary people. And that loss gets carried. And it can't be carried alone. For little ones, it's too much for them.
Oh, especially if there was that deep connection, that's for sure. I mean,
yeah.
Well, Lesley, I got to tell you, this has been awesome catching up with you again. And we got a couple questions I want to ask you before we finish out. But before we close, if someone would connect with you or learn more, where would you send them?
Okay, well, there's two possibilities. I'm just finishing a website for that has a big book component in it. That is called Schools that's you can get to by going to schoolsthatheal.net. It should be up by the end of the week. And I'm talking to you on January 19th. And you can also find me at Emotionally Responsive Practice at Bank Street if you go to the Bank Street College website.
Very cool. And I'll have those links in my show notes. And I think that's cool that you got your own website going for these books now. So I think that's awesome stuff. So that'll be there in the website, in the show notes, so that people can find it easily. And, last question, Lesley, it goes like this. If you had a chance to talk with an audience of parents whose children are in the early years of school, could you talk about the importance of providing opportunities for the children to read?
I would say read to them. Read to them, make sure they have time and support for open-ended play, for creative play. Have books around that reflect who they are and also what their interests are, and keep them off of the computer. Which is, my old-fashioned self and pretty impossible to do at this time when everybody's home all the time. But don't let that be the only source, because that kind of play doesn't have the same value emotionally as playing with make-believe things. It just doesn't. Play is a symbolic process. Learning to read is a symbolic process. Symbols feed symbols. So anything cognitive that you create feeds that part of your brain that can make sense of literacy.
I love it. This has been awesome catching up with you again, Lesley. And kudos on adding your newest tale, Wilson's Wishes. I got to tell you, Wilson is another cool character that you've added to your tales that help children deal with what's going on in the world around them under COVID. And we got Lilah, Jasmine, and now Wilson. And you got somebody on next? Got somebody coming up?
I'm not sure. I think this particular series is done. I think I'll have a different series to follow.
Well, cool. Look forward to hearing what's coming next when you're ready to share. So I love that. I can't thank you enough for sharing today, and wish you the very best in all you do.
Thanks so much, and thanks for having me.
Teaching Learning Leading K-12 is excited to be a member of Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. Teaching Learning Leading K-12 is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. The opinions expressed on Teaching Learning Leading K-12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching Learning Leading K-12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions for classroom teachers and school administrators. Teaching Learning Leading K-12 is produced for educational purposes. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll share it with your friends.